Carce, working in ecophysiology and really with a lot of knowledge on tillering in corn. And then we start moving that from the tillering into in corn, and then saying, okay, we need to do more work on intensification. So we put him and we throw him into a big project on intensification. And then in fact, what he's gonna show today is that, which is the beauty about many of our PhD students, is like, we usually give something to play or something to work around things, and then they go a little bit above and beyond in kind of looking at many topics. So, and then if someone really likes to gambling, I'm not recommending gambling, I will make a disclosure, but Ignacio is the PhD student in our team number 11, okay? After, 11 years of our lab here in Kansas, and then you are number 11. So if you really like numbers, we can do the number 11, okay? So that's a sign for working with Ignacio. So, but it has been a pleasure working with Ignacio. So, and what we usually do at the beginning, we put on a slide, trying to put my goal is to help to relax the person. So I'm trying to do that for him. A lot of things, what I'm trying, it's good for me to go back and think about everything that, Ignacio has done in the last several years. And we usually try to play with the words, with the names, just to think about traits that are coming with Ignacio. One of the, I usually emphasize most of the times is this imagination, because sometimes we are talking about a few ideas, and then we come up with chapters of the thesis, like just in a whole conversation. And that is what happens many times with him. And it happens in a couple of his chapters that we just thought a little bit out of the box, and then he did an awesome job on unfolding those chapters. He's usually, and you can see by working with him many times, very grateful. He always tells us that very grateful about working with us. He's also usually very grateful about working with many people. Very noble person. I can say that from Ignacio, very easygoing, very adaptable, more knowing that we were jumping from multiple projects and trying to work with multiple people. And when you work with multiple people, you need to work with multiple personalities, and you need to be patient. So always very good at that. And you see on the pictures, this, I think that is something that Ignacio has, and it's coming natural. He's very always caring, so he cares about people. And that's one of the things that I'm usually very proud of on trying to select from our team when we're looking at students who are looking for people also that they can make an impact, but they also kind of on the way, they usually try to make sure that they care about helping others. He has been mentoring new students too, and is great. Ignacio has done an awesome job on that. And for me, that is what really shows the impact. Today he's gonna show 3 chapters of the dissertation. He has another chapter that, because of time, he's not gonna be able to show. Ignacio has done above and beyond. You will see 3 publications. Great work. And then I usually like to say that in the last couple of months, even when we have him going to an internship and doing great things, he's always on target. And I put that because I have been very impressed on seeing him just get it done. And I like, we have many different personalities, guys that they go sometimes in rounds, and I need to say, okay, and then Ignacio usually is more on, let's get it done. Okay. And even when we were talking about this dissertation yesterday night, very late, he was already asking me questions about, okay, and before I'm to do this, I need to submit that. And I'm like, so sometimes I'm not sure who is the professor, but I'm very happy to have him. It was a blessing for us. At least for me too. So, and then I hope that you enjoy seeing everything that he has done, which is an awesome job. And then all the impact that he already has in all the people that is working in our team. So with that, I will just let him, since he's the start today.
Thank you, Ignacio, for the nice introduction.
Lucas, are you recording?
Perfect. So thank you all for being here today. We'll go ahead and get started. Just to put a general outline of how my dissertation is organized, we have a first chapter trying to assess the effect of maize planting date by hybrid maturity interactions, and for this is specifically in the United States Central Great Plains region. Then we have a second chapter, and this is more for the central and western part of the Central Great Plains for the continuous winter wheat rotations, trying to assess what can we do, what else can we do in trying to assess new alternatives or new crop rotations to intensify this basically the traditional winter wheat cropping system here, again in the United States Central Great Plains. Then for the third chapter, we'll shift the focus to the southern US, and we'll try to assess, in this case, double summer cropping, and specifically maize and soybean double cropping in the southern US, again as a way to intensify this region in the United States. And finally, the last chapter, more for the Corn Belt region, the more productive region here in the United States, trying to make a comparison between the most important crops, maize and soybean, across different yielding environments. For the purpose of today's presentation, we will only focus on chapter 2, 3, and 4, but you can also take a look to chapter number 1 if you want. So just to have a general introduction here, we know that global food demand is increasing from year to year, and this is attributed to several factors, such as, for example, changes in dietary in humans, and for example, more demand for animal protein, but also more demand for biofuels. And this brings us today to the current issue that global food security faces a growing imbalance between the amount of land that is currently under production versus the amount of land that is required now or is going to be required in the future to sustain that production. There is an imbalance between these two concepts. That is why we bring this concept of crop intensification, and that is the central topic for today's dissertation, that we need to find alternatives to increase the production, and meaning by production in agriculture specifically today, without expanding land, because we know that this can cause deforestation, this can cause soil erosion. So we need to find ways to increase the production without expanding land. And that is why we have two options in this way. The first one is to increase the yield of the individual crops per unit of land area. Examples of this, we have, for example, gains attributed to genetics that have been really successful in the past. Also gains attributed to management practices, nitrogen fertilizer, plant density, among others. And on the other way, we also can increase the number of crops that we are harvesting every year. Examples of this, we have, for example, multiple cropping, intercropping alternatives, among others. However, we also need to acknowledge that there are some limitations or some constraints when trying to go for these two options for crop intensification. In the case of increasing yield of a single crop per unit of land area, we know that these gains attributed to genetic, to management practices, are becoming slower compared to the past. And this is becoming very challenging for breeders, for example. On the other hand, when we are trying to increase the number of crops harvested per year, we know that we are also limited by several weather factors, such as, for example, the length of the growing season. We know that we cannot put as many crops as we want. We are limited by that growing season. And also, of course, the most limiting factor that we have in agriculture, the water. So sometimes the availability of water is another limiting factor when going from less intensified to more intensified, and meaning by this, increasing the number of crops harvested per year. So based on that, we will go now from chapter 2, 3, and 5, and I will explore the details behind. For the first one, in this case, entitled Exploring Alternative Crop Rotations to Continuous Winter Wheat for Agricultural Intensification, and as I mentioned before, we will focus today on the Central Great Plains of the United States. Just to start, you can see there the whole map of the Central Great Plains regions, but the purpose of today's study will focus on the central part of it, that includes the state of Nebraska, some part of Colorado, and of course, the state that we are right now is the state of Kansas. What are the main characteristics of these regions? It has a high evaporative demand, but also limited annual precipitation, usually being this precipitation in the whole Central Great Plains lower than the total annual evapotranspiration. And these two conditions have been the reason why this is the largest region of monoculture winter wheat in the world. By winter wheat usually planted in October and then harvested next year in June, July. However, in recent years, we also are having the problem of low levels of total productivity in these monoculture winter wheat systems. And this is attributed, for example, the yield stagnation of winter wheat, and also in some cases, extensive soil degradation attributed to summer fallow during summertime. However, potential solutions to increase the resiliency of these winter wheat-based cropping systems rely on the adoption of more intensified cropping systems, and meaning by this more crops in the rotation, but also more diversified cropping systems, and meaning by this more different crop species, different crop types, such as, for example, we can include forages, we can include cover crops. So we think that we need to move on this way of more intensified and diversified cropping systems. And this could help us to increase the overall total crop productivity in the systems by two different reasons. First, we can increase the efficiency with what we capture those resources. I mean by this, for example, solar radiation. Let's imagine that we only have monoculture winter wheat. We are only capturing an amount of that radiation from October to June, but then from June to the next October, we are wasting those solar radiation, water, nitrogen resources. So we can increase the efficiency with what we capture those resources, but also the efficiency with what we use those resources, how we use them. However, we also need to know that there are some potential challenges for the adoption of these more intensified and diversified cropping systems in the region. First, and of course, and as I mentioned in the previous slide, the amount of water that we need to sustain more crops in the rotation, especially on the summertime. And also another important factor is going to be how we manage the nitrogen just to support more crops in the rotation. And this is going to be more critical in cereal crops because we know the dependency that we have in cereals compared to other species. So these two factors are going to be very important for this chapter. So based on that, we have three different objectives. First, to quantify the fallow precipitation storage efficiency in the continuous winter wheat system. What is this concept of fallow precipitation storage efficiency? It's the amount of precipitation that we're effectively storing on the soil coming from precipitation that is going to be available for the next crop in the rotation. In this case, winter wheat. Then we also want to analyze and compare glucose equivalent yields. And what is this concept of glucose equivalent yields? Just let's imagine that we want to compare soybean and we want to compare maize, for example. Those are two different crops that the composition is very different. Soybean is more concentrated in protein, in oil, while on the other hand, maize is more concentrated in carbohydrates. Or let's imagine we want to compare forages, that the dry matter yield is going to be way higher than a grain purpose crop, for example. So we want a metric to try to assess that, and I will explain this concept later on in the presentation, but just to try to go on the idea behind using this concept of glucose equivalent yields. And also, of course, very important, the economic results, the profit that we have for the different rotations. And finally, for the third objectives, we want to determine the nitrogen partial factor productivity that you can see there, but basically it's the amount of yield that we obtain per unit of a total applied nitrogen. And not only for different cropping sequences in this case, it's not for two different nitrogen management, trying to see how we can improve this management in order to increase this metric and in order to increase the overall crop productivity. How we did this? We have a 3-year field experiments starting in October 2019 and finishing in October 2022 in Manhattan, Kansas, United States. We have 11 crop rotations that were having different crop types, I'm meaning by crop type, forage crops, grain crops, and cover crops. And also within these different crop types, we also have a different intensity. I'm meaning by this, the number of crops that we have along the 3 years in the rotation. And I will explain now in each step how we did the different nitrogen fertilizer management. We have the standard management that is the most traditional for farmers here in the region, but we also did a progressive nitrogen management, trying to make a whole improve management here. So regarding the timings, the nitrogen was broadcasted at planting and fixed 4 in the case of winter crops for the standard management. And in the case of the progressive, it was applied with streamer bars and split at fixed 4 and 6 for winter crops. And it was applied at B6 in the case of summer crops, sorghum and maize. In the case of the source, it was UAN in the case of the standard management. But in the case of the progressive, we also added some URIs and nitrification inhibitors. And finally, regarding the rates, it was a fixed rate in the case of the standard management, but it also had readjustment in the season based on in-season nitrogen recommendations, based in modeling for the progressive nitrogen management. So moving now to how we can describe the different rotations. Here you have a whole picture of the rotations. Don't worry, we will go one by one now trying to describe them. We have the baseline rotation that I mentioned before, is the continuous winter wheat. That is basically winter wheat planted in October and harvested in June, July. And then we have all the summer, the fallow period there, and then restarted again with another winter wheat planted in the next October. Then we have our grain purpose rotations that basically are winter wheat-based cropping systems with some double crops such as soybean, sorghum, and maize. And you can see there how the intensification level within this group goes from the top, increases from the top to the bottom. Then we also added forage purpose rotations, basically forage soybean, forage wheat, and you can see here again within this group how the intensification level increases from the rotations on the top to the rotation to the bottom. And then finally, we have a forage purpose rotation that basically consisted of winter wheat for forage purpose combined with double crop soybean for forage as well, but that did not include any grain purpose crops. So here we have all the 11 rotations that you can see that we will use for this chapter. Finally, moving to what are the metrics that we use for this chapter. Trying to address the first objective, we have the precipitation and storage efficiency during the summer fallow, and there you can see the formula, but basically it's the amount of water that we have stored at the end of the summer fallow minus the amount of water that we have at the beginning relative to the overall total precipitation in summer fallow. And the units of this metric is basically a percentage of the amount of precipitation that we were able to capture during that summer fallow time. Then we also analyze the yields in terms of total dry matter for both forage and grain crops. But as I mentioned before, we use this concept of glucose equivalent yield. And for that, we use a conversion factor, meaning that what is the amount of energy that we need, for example, to produce 1 gram of protein or 1 gram of oil. That is how we convert it from dry matter to glucose equivalent yield, trying to make a more fair comparison within different crop types, but also different species. Then we also did an economic analysis based on historical and projected budgets developed by the Department of Agricultural Economics here at K-State, trying to assess the income, the cost, but also the gross profits for all the 11 rotations. Finally, and as I mentioned before, trying to address the last objectives, here is the formula for the nitrogen partial factor productivity. We use the concept of the accumulated glucose equivalent yields relative to the total applied nitrogen during those 3 years. So now we'll move to the results for this chapter. And here you can see the precipitation and storage efficiency for the continuous winter wheat. And in this case, you can see the relationship between the water storage in the first meter of soil as a function of day of the year for that summer fallow. You can see there. And on the top, for 2 different years, on the left, you have 2021, and on the right, you have 2022. And you have on the top right the value of PCE, that is basically the precipitation and storage efficiency as a percentage. But basically, we can say that there was a similar fallow period length, close to 130 days for both 2021 and 2022, and also similar accumulated precipitation. So we can make a fair comparison between the 2 fallows, 2021 and 2022. The most important message is that the summer fallow presented low precipitation and storage efficiency, less than 20%, meaning that less than 1/5 of the total precipitation that we received during that summer fallow was effectively stored in the soil and available for the next winter wheat in the rotation. Moving now to the dry matter and the glucose equivalent yields, we can say that continuous winter wheat, the less intensified cropping systems attain the lowest yields in terms of dry matter and glucose equivalent, while on the other hand, the forage purpose rotation attain the highest yield. And there you can see a comparison of glucose equivalent yield for 4 different rotations that were varying in crop intensity. We have the continuous winter wheat, then we have the wheat and double cropping and the grain forage with similar yields, but higher than compared to the continuous wheat. And finally, we have the rotation that attained the highest yields, in this case, the forage-only purpose rotation. And this was associated with a greater contribution from forage crops, either if we express the yields in terms of dry matter or in terms of glucose equivalent yields. And finally, another important result from this part is that there was a positive association between these cumulative glucose equivalent yields in the rotation and the precipitation allocation. And what is this concept of precipitation allocation? Basically, it's the amount of precipitation that we effectively receive during the growing season relative to the total precipitation received during those 3 years. There was a positive association between this metric and the glucose equivalent yields. Moving now to the economic analysis, here you can see in terms of dollars per hectare for the same 4 rotations that I showed in the slide before. In the left, you have the total incomes, and on the right, you have the total expenses. And basically, we can say that the lowest incomes and expenses were associated with the continuous winter wheat, the less intensified systems, while the highest metric for those total income and total expenses were associated with the grain forage and forage rotation. And now you can see maybe the most important metric, the gross profit, again, in terms of dollar per hectare for those 4 rotations. And we can say that the winter wheat double cropping, basically winter wheat with maize or with soybean, attained the highest gross profits, and then followed by our less intensified rotation, the continuous winter wheat. Moving now to the last part, trying to assess the effect of nitrogen management on the nitrogen partial factor productivity. You can see here in this graph the relationship between that factor and for the 2 different nitrogen management, the standard and the progressive management. But overall, we can say that there was a greater partial factor productivity in the improved or the progressive management relative to the standard or more traditional nitrogen management. So overall, and as a conclusion for these chapters, we can say that no-till summer fallow had low precipitation storage efficiency. Remember, less than 20% of the total precipitation effectively stored in the soil. Then, that including annual and perennial forages, as we saw for the forage purpose rotation, could help us to increase the total productivity of the rotations, maybe close to doubling the productivity in the winter wheat system, the less intensified, more traditional system here. Then, however, when we explore in terms of economics, the double cropping after winter wheat and medium intensified systems attain the highest gross profits. And finally, and when we assess the effect of nitrogen management, we can see that the progressive management increased the nutrient partial factor productivity relative to the more traditional nitrogen management integration. For future studies in this chapter, we think that this intensification alternatives is very important to test them at a non-farm scale, trying to see how they behave in real life. Then also explore what are the social constraints to the adoption of these more intensified cropping systems. Factors such as, for example, changes in land tenure, or also the risk aversion for farmers to adopt these more intensified cropping systems. And finally, we also think that policies should be based on current scientific findings to promote the adoption of these more intensified cropping systems. So moving now to chapter number 3, and now, and as I mentioned before, we changed the focus from the central Green Plains, and we will focus now on the southern US, and we'll try to assess the effect of maize and soybean as double summer crops in the region. And just to start, we can say that most of the North American land that is available for multiple cropping is only currently on the production of cereal and legumes, but only on the single crops per year, meaning that a lot of those resources are not being fully explored to promote or to use the whole growing season in this region, or even in the whole North America. Also, we know that the expansion of these more intensified cropping systems are limited by several, especially weather factors, such as, for example, the length of the growing season that we have, and this is very important, especially in summer crops, and also the water availability to sustain more than one crop in the rotation. For example, not only maize or not only soybean, it's not more than one crop in the rotation. And also, it's very important to mention this, that the previous knowledge or previous experience with temporal intensified cropping systems is usually associated with winter crops and then followed by a summer crop. And especially the most common case that we know that is winter with double crop soybeans. However, we think that the cereal and legume double summer crops, and specifically for today's purpose, maize and soybean double summer crops, we think that has the potential to increase the land productivity. And for the purpose of today, that the metric that we'll use to measure the land productivity, we use this concept of land equivalent ratio that I will explain later on in the presentation. But basically, it's the relative land required in the monocultures to achieve the same yield or the same production as we have in the double croppings. And there you have the formula, and we will go on this concept later on in material committees. For the purpose of the chapters, we combine field data in Mississippi with crop modeling, trying to assess the effect across different years of data. The objectives that we have for this chapter: first, we wanted to assess the feasibility. It's very important. First, we wanted to do that. Is it possible to do double summer cropping in this region or not, of cultivating maize and soybean in the southern US? Then, when we have that, we wanted to move forward and explore the best scenarios of maize and soybean as double cropping, and in this case, putting field data combined with crop modeling, trying to assess the land equivalent ratio. And finally, and very important to evaluate the risk of crop failure for these cropping systems. And for that, we will use the amount of, what is the possibility of reaching physiological maturity before first frost. That is how we will consider this concept of risk failure that I will explain later on too. So moving now to how we did this, we have the field study. That was 1 year, 2018, in Stoneville, Mississippi, United States. We have maize and soybean as double crops, but we also have the respective full season crops. All these combining different cycle lengths, different genotypes that were basically varying the differences in cycle length, and I will explain that. We have different comparative relative maturity for maize, and as you can see here, 101, 105, 108, and 111. Usually the first 101 and 105 are more adapted to the northern part of the United States, while on the other hand, for example, the 111 are more suitable for this southern US region. And then we have the maturity groups for soybean. You can see there 1.5, 1.6, more adapted to the northern part of the Cold Belt. And then we have different maturity groups, longer maturity groups, such as, for example, 2.8, 3.7, and 4.6, better adapted to the region that we are studying today. Why we did this? Because we wanted to obtain different combinations of cycle lengths. Let's imagine, for example, that this is our standard hybrid 111 CRM, combined and allowing only for a small portion of the growing season for the next double crop soybean. But also wanted to test, okay, what happens if we shorten that time for maize, that growing season, by putting a lower CRM, and we allow more growing season for soybean? Is that going to increase the overall productivity of the system? And for that, we will use the concept of the land equivalent ratio, trying to see what are the optimal combinations of cycle length for both maize and soybean that can help us to increase the land productivity. For the crop modeling, we use the absent crop growth model, in this case, the classic version of it. We use long-term simulations over 30 years of data, trying to assess not only the effect, and similar to the field study, of different cycle lengths, if not also we wanted to test the effect of different planting days, especially for this first crop. What happens if we plant earlier in the season? We can allow for more growing season at the end as well. So we will test planting dates and different maturity cycles here. And for that, we use the standard maize and soybean genotypes adapted in Balboa 2019. But basically a different combination of CRM or maturity groups in the case of soybean. We are coming for, in the case of maize, adapting the thermal time between flowering and physiological maturity between R1 and R6. And in the case of soybean, the different maturity groups were adapted by changing the thermal time between flowering and start to grain filling, and also from start to end of grain filling. Moving now to the last part of materials and methods. What was the metric? And as I mentioned before, the land equivalent ratio that you can see there, but basically it's the sum of the relative yield components in the double cropping, all relative to the full season of the best adapted CRM or maturity groups, maize and soybean respectively. And as you can see, they are best adapted to the region. But basically, what does the value of land equivalent ratio indicate to us? Let's say that we have 1.5 of land equivalent ratio, meaning that we need 50% more of land in the monocultures to attain the same productivity as we have in the double crop. So moving on to the results on the field study, on the graph on the left, we have the yields of maize at first crop. And on the graph on the right, we have the different soybean yields as double cropping after each CRM of maize, as you can see there. So for example, let's say that here we have the yield for the CRM 101. And there you can see the yield of the soybean planted after that genotype, in this case planted, for example, in August 1st, for the different maturity groups of soybean in the field study. Then let's suppose that here we have the yield of the longest CRM that we have for our study, 111. And there you have the different yields, the yields of the different maturity groups in the case of soybean. And here you can see the difference that we have on planting dates. Remember that the other one was August 1st, and in this case it's August 15th. We have 15 days of difference between the shortest and the longest CRM. So here you have the whole picture of the yields of maize and soybean as double crops. But overall, we can say that maigre yields show a trend of increasing with longer CRM. Also that when we look at the soybean yields of double crop, the highest soybean yields were attained with intermediate to long maturity groups. And overall, as a combination of maize and soybean, we can say that the highest soybean yields were attained with the latest harvesting for maize, in this case, 111 days. This is a result of the yield for the field study. Let's see now what happened with the land equivalent ratio in the field study. Here you have all the different values for the land equivalent ratio. On each panel, you have the combination of a specific CRM for maize, comparative relative maturity, 101, 105, 108, and 111. And here we have all the combinations within each of those of the different maturity groups of soybean in the field study. What are the orange and the green bars? The orange bars indicate the contribution of the first crop, in this case, maize, to the whole land equivalent ratio, and the green bar represent the contribution of soybean as double crop to the land equivalent ratio. This dashed line indicates a land equivalent ratio of 1, meaning that neither advantage or disadvantage of the double crops over the monocultures. What are the most important messages here? The land equivalent ratios range between those values that you can see there. But overall, we can say that there was an advantage of double crops over the respective monocultures. Also, when we look at the largest land equivalent ratios, we're attained with the longest growth cycle of the longest CRM for maize. And as you can see there, that the whole bar is higher compared to all the other combination of CRM, shorter CRMs and maturity groups. And overall, that a great contribution of soybean, or the soybean crop of soybean as double crop to the land equivalent ratio was obtained with intermediate, as you can see there, to long maturity groups for this crop. Moving now to results in the crop modeling part and the effect of the different combination of comparative relative maturities and soybean maturity groups, as you can see there, to the land equivalent ratio. So for example, here we have a combination of a CRM 90 with a maturity group number 1. The shortest combination of CRMs are maturity groups. And on the value on the top, you can see the overall or the total land equivalent ratio for that combination. So a darker color indicates a lower land equivalent ratio, while on the other hand, a lighter color indicates a greater total land equivalent ratio of that combination. In this case, maturity group 4 and CRM 110 for the crop model. Overall, we can see that the total land equivalent ratio range between those values that you can see there, very similar to the field study. And again, we can say that there was an advantage of double crops relative to the monocultures because all the values of land equivalent ratio on each combination were greater than 1. Also, we can say that the higher land equivalent ratio values were attained with the longest CRM for maize, 110, combined with the soybean maturity group 3. So you can see the value there for that combination, 1.33. And overall, we can say that the reduction in the land equivalent ratio, and we can see this by moving from the bottom to the top part of the chart, the reduction in the land equivalent ratio, the darker the value is, was mainly attributed to a decrease in the maize contribution to the land equivalent ratio that was not compensated or that was not offset by a greater contribution from soybean. So even though we shortened the growing season or the growth cycle for maize, trying to allow for more growing season for soybean, it did not affect from the soybean component and did not either keep or increase the land equivalent ratio relative to the lighter values that we can see here on the bottom part of the chart. Finally, and as I mentioned, trying to address the third objective, trying to assess the proportion of success and what we call the proportion of success, in this case for the crop modeling part, is the percentage of simulations that are reaching a physiological maturity. Of course, for the second crop is the one that is going to be more compromised at the end of the growing season before the occurrence of the first frost. And here you can see the different planting days for maize at first crop at March 5th, March 15th, March 25th, and April 5th, different planting dates, all combined for a maturity, for a CRM 110, all combined with different maturity groups of soybean, as you can see there, 1, 2, 3, and 4. Overall, the most important message that we can say from this part is that the large decreases in success or in the proportion of simulation that reach physiological maturity before first frost occur when we change the planting day from April 15 and later than March 25th. As you can see there. And also, within each planting date, there was a decrease in the proportion of success when moving from maturity groups 1 and 2 to maturity groups, to longer maturity groups such as 3 and 4. So finally, and as a conclusion from this chapter, we can say, remember first, the first objective that we have for this chapter, maize soybean double crop is a feasible system, and we show that by the yields in the field study, but also we reinforce that concept by showing the land equivalent ratio in the field study and in the crop modeling. So it's a feasible production system in the southern US. Also, that the maximum land equivalent ratios were achieved with a combination of the longest CRM and then followed by an intermediate to long soybean maturity group. Then, and very importantly, the maize contribution to the overall land equivalent ratio is a key factor to the success of the system. We need to optimize or maximize the contribution from this first crop to the overall success of this maize and soybean double crop system. And finally, that the soybean risk of not reaching physiological maturity, even though that changes from different planting dates and different maturity groups, was relatively low, less than 25%. So overall, and as a future direction from this chapter, we think that within the region, other intensification alternatives should also be explored, different crop combinations, but also different management practices, how we can optimize. And remember, the first crop is very important to the overall contribution of the system. So how we change the different planting dates as well. Also, and very important to explore the expansion of this system to other regions, not only the southern US, if not other regions in the United States, for example, toward higher latitudes, let's say the Corn Belt. It is a feasible system here or not? And then, and very important, this is more related to the current scenario of climate change, to address what are the possibilities, but not only the possibilities, if not what are the risks in the current scenario of, for example, rising temperatures or rising CO2 of this maize and soybean double cropping system. So moving now to the last chapter, chapter number 4, and as I mentioned before, benchmarking maize and soybean yields, and I will focus today on the most productive region in the United States Corn Belt. Just to start, I will not say something new. Maize usually attains higher yields relative to soybean, and we already know that. And this is especially true under a wide range of environmental conditions. I mean, under low, medium, and high environments. And what are the main reasons to say that this happens? We have 4 different factors affecting this. First, we have the carbon fixation metabolism. Let's think that maize is a C4 plant, while on the other hand, soybean is a maize is a C4, while on the other hand, soybean is a C3 plant. Then we have also differences in canopy architecture. Maize usually attains higher canopy coverage early in the season relative to soybean. We also have the energy content in grain, and as I mentioned before, soybean is usually more concentrated in protein and oil, so maize is usually more concentrated on carbohydrates. And finally, we have the cost of the carbon cost of biological nitrogen fixation that is present in the case of soybean, but that is not present in the case of maize, because we provide the nitrogen by nitrogen fertilization. However, there is a lack of studies that are comparing basically grain yields one crop to another, but very important in side to side, comparing both crops side to side in the same years over a large spatial scale, meaning the whole corn belt in the recent decades. That is why we propose the use of the crop performance trials, that are trials trying to assess the effect of different genotypes. For the purpose of today, we will not focus on the genotype effect. We shall focus on the effect of maize and soybean. We will use these trials conducted by universities on each state in the corn belt and combined with a Bayesian approach. Going to the objectives now. First, basically, we wanted to investigate the association between maize and soybean yields. And as I mentioned before, growth in familiar geography in the same years, but very importantly, using standard farming practices. Then, once we had that association, we wanted to identify what are the most important management, soil, and weather variables that are driving that difference between maize and soybean. And finally, we wanted to estimate the maize to soybean yield ratios across different yielding environments. This ratio that is basically is the yield of maize divided the yield of soybean is a value that usually is around 3, but we will see that also changes from one yielding environment to another. So these are the 3 objectives that we have for this chapter. Going now to the data sources. And as I mentioned before, we used the performance trials. First, we did an assessment for the state of Kansas, and then we extended the analysis to the whole corn belt. In the case of Kansas, we combined sites by year, by water regimes, either dryland or irrigated conditions, and we obtained a total of 212 observations, and you can see there the spatial distribution of those combinations across the state of Kansas. Usually in the western part, more concentrated in irrigated observations relative to dry. And then, as I mentioned before, we extended the analysis to the whole corn belt. You see that Kansas is not included here, but you can see there the spatial distribution of the observation for the whole corn belt data set. And in this case, obtaining close to 800 site by year by water regime combinations. The first result, I'm trying to assess the relationship between soybean yield and as a function of maize grain yield. And as I mentioned before, first we did the analysis for Kansas, and then we extended for the whole corn belt. You can see there the relationship between the yields of both crops. But very importantly, we observed that soybean yield reached a plateau in really high yielding environments in this part of the state. You can see that is also coincident with irrigated observations. Then we also wanted to understand why is happening this plateau in the state of Kansas. And that is why we propose the use of a Bayesian binary model. And as you can, I will explain it now. So here we have all the iteration from the Bayesian model. So we have some observation, for example, you can see in iteration number 1, that we have plateau. We have some values that are over the plateau, and we will put a value of 1 to that. And then we have some values that were below the plateau, and we will see, we will put a value of 0 in that case. And you can see that for iteration number 2, and like that. We wanted to see what is the reasons of the variables that are helping to break that plateau. So we combine that data set that we created. You can see they are composed of 1s and 0s, meaning that being above or below the plateau for the state of Kansas. And then trying to explain that with crop management data, with soil data, and with weather data. And here you can see the coefficient values for the different components of the binary model that I will go one by one group by one group. So for example, in the case of the year, we have a positive coefficient, meaning that in recent years, we have more chances or more probabilities to be above the plateau relative to the past, relative to the initial part of the data. Then for the component of, for the management variables, we have irrigation and planting date with opposite effect. Irrigation with a positive coefficient, meaning that if we have irrigation observations, we have more chances to be on the top part of the or above the plateau. And with planting date with a negative coefficient value, because it was expressed in day of the year. So let's imagine that we have a higher value of day of the year. We are planting later, and we decrease the potential, so we have less chances to be on the lower part of the plateau or below the plateau. Then regarding the soil variables, we did not have an important effect of those, clay, sand, and silt content. And then regarding the weather variables, the one that is more important to mention is the precipitation early in the season, April, May, meaning that if we have more precipitation early in the season, we are having more chances to increase the yield potential, and therefore more chances to be for soybean above the plateau ratio. Then, and as I mentioned before, we extended the analysis to the whole corn belt, the same relationship that I showed for Kansas, soybean grain yield as a function of maize grain yield. And observe here that even though we did not observe that plateau, remember that we saw for Kansas, we saw a decelerating pattern, and as you can see for soybeans, relative to maize grain yield. And finally, I'm more trying to address the last objective, trying to address the maize to soybean yield ratio for the whole corn belt data set. Here you can see the density plot for that ratio, maize to soybean yield ratio, across 4 different yielding environments, 0 to 80 bushels per acre, 80 to 160, 160 to 240, and 240 to 312 bushels per acre across the 4 different yielding environments. That those are 0 to 5 tons per hectare, 5 to 10, 10 to 15, and 15 to 20. But the most important message here is that, and as you can see there, that higher maize to soil yield ratios were observed as the environment improved from the top to the bottom. So finally, as a general conclusion for these chapters, we can say that, and as I showed for the state of Kansas, soybean yields reach a plateau in really high yielding environments in these states. Then that plateau was attributed to optimal growing conditions, such as, for example, early planting dates and irrigated observation. Then when we extended the analysis from Kansas to the whole corn belt, even though we did not observe a plateau, we observed a decelerating pattern for soybeans relative to maize. And finally, and as I showed in the previous slide, the maize to soybean yield ratio increased as the environment improved. So as future directions for this chapter, we can say that there should be a better, the future study should focus on a better understanding on what are the genotype, the management, and the environmental factors that are driving to this plateau trend in soybean yields, or that may be imposing a limitation to soybean yields. Just to mention some of them, for example, future studies should take a look at the biological nitrogen fixation. Is the fixation enough to sustain really higher yield in the case of soybean, to sustain yields more than 6 tons per hectare, 7 tons per hectare? And then very important, the thermophotoperiod conditions, and especially early in the season, that are driving the low canopy interception that soybean has usually in the month of May or June relative to maize. Then, very important, compare the performance of both crops, maize and soybean, and the different weather scenario in the current scenario of climate change. And finally, and very important, to expand the analysis, not only finish the analysis here in the corn belt, trying to see if this happens across different regions in the United States, but also we can extend the analysis across the globally, trying to see if we see these trends of plateau or deceleration patterns for soybean relative to maize across other different data sets on different parts in the world. So as a general conclusion for the whole dissertation, in the chapter number 2, we explore different alternative crop rotations to continuous winter wheat in the central and Great Plains. We showed that some rotations, including forages, could be very beneficial in terms of yields. However, when we did the economic analysis over them, we showed that maybe less intensified rotations, such as winter wheat and double cropping, may be more advantageous relative to the more intensified rotations. Then in chapter number 3, we changed the focus to the southern US, and we showed the feasibility of growing maize and soybean as double crops, but we also showed the risks of doing this, and also what are the optimal combination of different growth cycles. In chapter number 4, finally, we did a comparison between maize and soybean yields, and we showed deceleration and examination pattern for Kansas, and then extended the analysis for the whole Corn Belt. And we also showed that the difference of the maize to soybean yield ratio increases as the environment improves. So the difference between both crops has increased as we improve the environment. So with that, I finish this presentation. I wanna give a special thank you to my committee, Dr. Ignacio Massigoge, Sarah, Trevor, and Bara. Thank you for your support, for your help, for your time with me. I really appreciate it. Then also give a special thanks to all my friends here, the Ciampiri Lab, and all my friends here in the Department of Agronomy across these almost 3 years, 3 years and a half that I've been here. So thank you all so much. Then a special thanks to Connie for being my partner in life, and for being here with me, supporting me, being always on my side. Very special thanks for helping my dreams to come true. And then a special thanks to my family that had a chance to be here with me, knowing what I was doing here, being here in Manhattan. So we really enjoyed that. For always, not only for this PhD time, if not for my whole life, for always being at my side, supporting me. It's very important to understand what I came to do here, how they supported me through that. So I will always be very, very thankful to these special people that I love so much. So with that, I really want to say thank you for your attention, for being here, and I hope you have enjoyed the presentation.